Welcome to Real Life Beyond Faith, where a formerly Christian, currently atheist couple takes a deep dive into the experience of life after deconversion. This is episode 33. I'm your host, Jenica Crail.
And I'm your host, Patrick Crow.
So this week we interview Jon Willis of the Wayward Willis Podcast. And we really like Jon, and we enjoy his podcast a lot. I think the first time I encountered him was maybe when he followed us on Twitter or something. And then he reached out to us and was asking if we'd like to be on the show. So I checked out his show. I'm like, this is actually really entertaining.
Yeah, it is.
I really enjoyed it. So a few weeks ago, were on the Wayward Willis and talked about faith with him and a little bit about our backgrounds and stories. And I decided that his story sounded pretty interesting, and we had him on this week. So we hope you enjoy it. It was a really good, interesting interview. His story is pretty fascinating, and I'm sure very relatable to a lot of people.
Yeah, very.
So we'll get right to that. But first, here's a quick break. Hey there. If you like what we're doing and want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/reallifebeyondfaith and become a patron for as little as $1 per episode. Your support is greatly appreciated and goes toward a podcast hosting site, equipment, time spent recording and editing, and our activism in our community and beyond. You'll also gain access to behind-the-scenes video content from our recording shenanigans. Another great way to support us is to give us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher, or share our show on social media. You can find us at facebook.com/reallifebeyondfaith and Twitter at RLBFpod. And you can email us at reallifebeyondfaith@gmail.com.
All right, so tonight we have Jon Willis from the Wayward Willis Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really love talking to the two of you.
Likewise. Yeah, we enjoyed talking to you last time.
We're very professional over here.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, it was great being on your show a few weeks back. Thanks for having us on yours.
No, thank you for coming on. I feel like one of the best things about having the podcast is being able to talk to interesting and awesome people like yourselves.
Agreed.
Yeah, we definitely enjoy that part of it, like going on each other's shows and stuff like that. But when we were talking to you on your show, we were talking a little bit about background and stuff like that. And I was thinking to myself, we need to have him on our show so you can tell your story. So that's why I reached out and asked if you would join us. So thank you so much for being willing to.
Yeah, no problem.
So we hear that you went to the American Atheist Convention in Oklahoma. How was that?
You know what? It was really great. So I've been to different conventions, Skepticon and Gateway to Reason and the like, where the sizes vary so much. Some of them are really large and some of them are pretty small and intimate. And the American Atheist Conference this year was a really good medium size. It was just one main room where they did the talks and the workshops and all of that. And then the rest of the little second floor hotel area was filled up with all the vendor tables and the guests and everybody just milling around. And it was really nice because there was a lot of room for everybody, but you were still close to everyone, and there was a lot of conversation just happening off in corners and just in next to tables, and you could always find somebody to talk to. So it was really good.
That's one of my favorite things about conferences is like just the conversations that happen off on the side. Like the speakers are amazing, and I love like the actual conference part, but half the time, like the reason I go is because of the people who will be there and people I get to actually like see every once in a while just because of conferences.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And half the time we've heard some of these people speak before, so it's not always different every time we see them. So being able to connect with some friends and some like-minded people is definitely a highlight of going to those things.
Right. And, it's really great to see other podcasters and other personalities, definitely some of the guests and representatives from some of the more well-known groups. But I found that when I was getting into conversations with just people that were walking around that maybe hadn't been to a convention before, or, they just go to all the conventions, it was really nice just talking to them because they have stories and they have, different experiences. And those are the stories that are really fun to talk through and listen to, because you don't hear these people on a podcast every week. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. There's so many stories that are untold.
I heard you got to hang out with Sharon Frankel for a bit. Is that right?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I did. She's so delightful.
Yeah, she is. I actually hung out with her in Milwaukee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I got to hang out with her in Milwaukee, and she is a riot.
Yeah, she really is. So she and I walked around for a little bit. We sat through a couple talks together, and then we went to dinner at this really cool place. I can't even remember what it was called, like Kitchen some number. And it was really good. And we just were talking about the podcasts and talking about, our different experiences in different areas of the country. And it was just really great to hang out with her. So if anybody is listening and they have not met Sharon Frankel, they need to meet Sharon Frankel.
I have actually not met her in person.
Yeah.
I've only heard good things about her, and we're friends on Facebook, but I have yet to meet her in person. And I look forward to it one day.
Yeah, and I don't know if we already mentioned it, but Sharon is the podcaster who does habeas humor. So if y'all want to check her out. I've been saying y'all lately.
Jays.
I think I'm starting to become Southern.
We're too close to Kentucky.
That's actually really funny, because before we started recording on your last episode that I just listened to today, you had said y'all, and then both of you got into an argument over whether saying y'all is okay or not.
Yeah.
It's still a topic, apparently.
Because I keep saying it.
Yeah. So what would you say were a couple of your favorite highlights of the American Atheist Conference?
Well, obviously the keynote speaker, Hugh Laurie, who plays Dr. House, or played Dr. House, he was on there and did a conversational sit-down chat with David Silverman. And the things that they were talking about were really good. They were talking about, some of the writing on the shows that he's been on, and how a lot of the atheist perspective is purposely written into those characters, and that, he really appreciates that. He is definitely an outspoken atheist. I wouldn't call him an activist. I don't really see him as an activist in the public square, but he definitely has, his problems with religion, and it was really cool to listen to him talk through that, because he, in the UK, they, don't have the same kind of blatant religiosity as we do here in the US.
Right, exactly.
And so he would compare and contrast, how they deal with religion over there and how he has to deal with religion over here, and what a stark contrast it was.
Yeah, I bet.
And what a shock when he came over to the States.
Sometimes it's kind of just an activist move just to be open about it,
Right.
Like, you could very easily just, brush it off or say you're not religious and then just leave it at that. But the fact that he's outspoken about being an atheist, it's like, well, that's kind of like activism in and of itself. And I always appreciate celebrities who come out like that, because, it's not an easy thing to take on yourself in the public sphere.
Yeah, it's almost easier to come out as an atheist and maintain some sort of atheism when you are, practically invisible. But when you're talking about somebody like Hugh Laurie, who actually has following and a fan base and a catalog of work, to come out openly as atheist is a little more bold. It's at least definitely more public.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
But one of the things that they had discussed especially since he is a little more open about being an atheist, is the fact that, people who are looked at as, icons, celebrities, that kind of thing, who come out as atheist are helping to normalize it. And I do think that that's a really good point.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I don't know if you saw this today, but David Silverman, who's the head of American Atheists, just today, an article came out saying that they asked him to take a leave of absence because of something going on. Now, they haven't mentioned what has gone on, but it's kind of shocking to hear that something's going on with him.
Yeah, and it kind of crushed me today. They also sent an email out to American Atheist members with no more explanation than we got on Twitter and Facebook. But, in our current climate and the ability of people to start speaking out and being taken seriously, we can only imagine what this pertains to.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's especially disheartening because we had David Silverman on our podcast on one of the earliest episodes, and he talked a lot about, planning this conference and how the American Atheists stand on the Me Too movement and just general harassment and everybody getting along. And he put a lot of emphasis on, not being an asshole and not harassing people and that kind of thing. So, we don't want to jump to conclusions, but we definitely know that this kind of thing is going on. And, if that's the case, that would be very saddening.
Yeah, it really
And with
is.
everything going on lately, that's been the trend. Like if someone gets called out for something, that's usually what the issue is.
Right. Sexual
Well,
nature.
and I mentioned on my last episode about, idolizing people or, putting people on pedestals. And David Silverman is, and it has been, a very, very good voice for atheism and has been doing a lot of good work. But, that doesn't mean that he's superhuman, that he's above ethical and moral rules that we all try to adhere to. And so in that respect, I want to, just say that he's just another person and he can have his faults as well. And, we shouldn't look at him as something more than just another person that's in the movement and, not go the route of all the controversy when the Lawrence Krauss thing broke.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we have to recognize that just because he's, on this pedestal, that he shouldn't be responsible for his actions. Like a lot of people will hold their idols up here, and if they do something wrong, all they want to do is like make excuses for them because they don't want to see that person like lowered to like normal human
right.
level. And so I think it's also really important that we recognize like, no, he's not above these rules, these consent rules and things like that. If that ends up being what this is about, which I've heard a couple of rumors, which I'm not going to share, but it's like, it's the Whisper Network. Like, did you know so-and-so did this? You might just want to be careful around them. And it feels like the rumor or the Whisper Network is becoming a little louder lately, and people are being called out for their inappropriate behavior. So, it's disappointing because every time you turn around, it's somebody else that you admire. But also, it'll probably in the long run make it a safer world because people will know if I do this thing, I'm probably not going to get away with it, at least not for very long.
Right. And that kind of consideration is fine. I think what I would strive for is a world where people aren't concerned about the ramifications of their actions so much as they are just concerned about doing the right thing to begin with.
Yeah.
And, just like the American Atheists slogan from a little while back, just being good for goodness sake.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do think that it's our job as skeptics in this movement to not make excuses and to view the situation holistically and realistically and realize that, all of the people that we respect and look up to have a private life we don't know about, and we shouldn't be making excuses until we know what's going on.
Yep, exactly. Well, I feel like we could talk about this for quite a while, but we wanted to talk to you and find out about you and share your story. So we're going to back it up a little bit. And would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your podcast?
Well, sure. I mean, if there's one thing that I know about, it's me.
That's good.
I hope so.
So, yeah, I was born into an Army family, and we moved around a lot. My parents were both from small town Midwest, and they were both very religious, as one would expect. And so my Christian upbringing was very strict. It was very, righteous upbringing, and I was very sheltered as a child. So one of the things with belief throughout my childhood is that you're always plagued with doubt, right?
Yeah.
And so my faith in Christianity kind of waxed and waned throughout my childhood. And I went through these slumps where it wasn't very important to me, or it was inconvenient and boring. And then I went through these other times where I was just, on fire for the Lord and just couldn't get enough church. Yeah. And, this kind of happened, ebbs and flows, until I was in high school, when I just got really, really Jesus-y. And so,
haven't we all?
Yeah. It was my job as a good, upstanding Christian youth to try and bring all of my friends to the Lord and, save everybody's souls. And I tried that, and it didn't always work. In fact, it hardly ever worked. And I think, Jenica, you and I kind of talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, I can relate hardcore to that.
Yeah. And so you start to feel like a failure, right?
Yeah.
Because, if what you're selling is eternal bliss and salvation, and it's just the best thing in the now and the hereafter, then how could somebody not accept it? What are you doing wrong, right?
Yeah. And I felt a responsibility for their souls, because I was the one with the Holy Spirit in me leading me to reach out to them and, bring Jesus to them. And if I failed to do so, then their soul was on the line.
Right. Because if they know,
a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. If they know that you are that kind of person and you are proselytizing to them, if it doesn't work out, that's kind of discouraging. And I don't know, it's kind of, it makes you feel like it's on your shoulders.
Yeah.
The pressure.
Yeah.
Right. Because as a Christian, that's your job. Mm-hmm. That's your calling. So I got through high school, and, I had grown up with some fairly racist and bigoted views, either directly from my family or just kind of the community that I grew up in. And so I carried those around with me as I was in the Army. And I had a couple of encounters while I was in the Army with both churches of various denominations that either made me feel bad or just freaked me out completely. Mm-hmm. And so I started to really question, how important is this now that I'm not in my parents' house? I'm not being forced to go to church, and it kind of seems like it's easier just not to. And so, those little seeds of doubt started to grow. And over the course of, like a decade, I just fell more and more and more out of that religious mindset. And it wasn't until, I believe, I started watching YouTube videos and came across Seth Andrews and the Thinking Atheist. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, unless my memory is just really faulty, that's kind of what set me down a lot of this makes sense path. And a lot of what I was thinking before is just not right.
Yeah, his talk about the God glasses really hit me when I was going through my deconversion. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I've been viewing my whole world through God glasses. And when I take them off, it's like, holy shit, this doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, and he did a really beautiful video. I can't remember what it was called. It was like Life is Beautiful or something like that. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
But it was almost like an inspirational video, and it just had like this great imagery and this wonderful swelling music underneath it. And it just kind of brought me to tears. I was like, you know what? Life, like there doesn't have to be an afterlife for life to be worth it.
Right.
And so those kinds of things just really helped me along. But as I've mentioned on my podcast, it took me a really long time to kick this mindset. And in the meantime, I had gotten married, and I had Logan, who is my oldest son on the podcast with me. And he did not benefit at all from any religious deconversion, because that was still like, I got married very, very young. Mm-hmm. And part of that was the mentality of, the Christian mentality of, if you have sex, you need to marry that person.
Right. Exactly.
And so, I feel like that's the kind of damaging mentality that religion instills in people, because that's not a good reason to get married.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of people do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, we kind of rushed our engagement for that reason, because we were trying to stay pure. Right. And so we got engaged and got married 6 months later, and like had to rush everything, and it was very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the main reason. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So let's back it up just a minute, if you don't mind. Yeah. So kind of put a pin in that, where you were going there. You said that when you were in the Army, you had some experiences with like other churches or denominations or whatever that were bad or made you feel weird. What do you mean by that? And like, what was it exactly that kind of made you doubt based on those situations?
Okay. Well, part of the thing that you encounter in the military is that primarily the service is to Catholics. And so if I grew up thinking that the Catholics were all idolaters that were going to hell.
Yeah.
And so, going in with that mindset, for instance, in basic training, you don't have any free time, and you are confined to a space. You are living with these people you don't know. You are, scrubbing floors and making beds, etc. But the only time that you can really get any free time is on Sunday if you go to church.
Right.
And if you don't go to church, then you are doing chores in the barracks the whole time while everybody else is just sitting there in the air conditioning.
It's totally screwed up. You should have free time while everyone else is.
It's kind of like the smokers. If you ever worked at a restaurant job, like people who smoke automatically get a break. If you don't smoke, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, you have to like make up for everyone else being outside smoking.
So your choice is scrub floors or go to church. And so, I was like, well, I grew up in church. That's fine. I'd rather have the time off anyway. And when I got to the church, it was a Catholic service. And that was very strange to me because they were, essentially saying the same things. They weren't like fire-breathing idolaters on their way to hell the way that I was taught.
Right.
But at the same time, it was like there were just differences where I was like, well, how can we both believe in Jesus and still think differently like this? I mean, like if you read the same book and you believe in the same guy, then you should be able to, have conversations that are completely compatible and not really have to explain yourself much.
Yeah, like large disagreements. That I always wondered about that too, because I was like, well, if we both have the same Holy Spirit in our lives, why is he saying different things to us?
Right.
Like even among Protestants, there were such huge differences of opinions about stuff. And I just thought, where's the leading? Like, where's God like leading, I guess, our thoughts and our understanding of his word? Because like I thought that, the Holy Spirit spoke to you as you read the word and stuff. And it was just like, well, we all have such different opinions.
Yeah, and we can't all be right.
Yeah.
So where's that difference there?
Yeah, that definitely led me to ask questions too.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is, we can't all be right, but we could definitely be all wrong.
Right, exactly.
But you don't really think about that. And one of the things that I think kind of helped this to be a weird situation for me was I really wasn't exposed to other religious views when I was growing up. And, my parents, it wasn't that they were, keeping me in the house and I wasn't allowed to talk to other people or anything like that. But it was just, we went to our church and we worshiped with our people and we read our book, our way. And there was no reason for me to, attend a different church or talk to somebody of a different religious persuasion unless I was trying to convert them. And so, once I got out on my own and I started encountering people, not just in church, but just in general, who had different beliefs, no beliefs, it was really eye-opening to me because I didn't realize that all of these people were out there. I mean, how could I have realized this when I was so sheltered as a kid?
Right. Now, when you were in the Army, did you encounter many atheists that were in the Army? Like the whole, you don't find an atheist in a foxhole thing.
Now, I really couldn't say because it wasn't as though, unless there was something specifically religious going on, it wasn't as though anybody really talked about their religion. And, I had a couple of experiences. Okay, I'll tell you one other experience that was just very, very strange to me. And to this day, I cannot figure out why they do this or did this or what purpose it serves. When I was in the Army, I was on tanks. I was on the M1 tank. And we would go out periodically into the field with the tanks and we would shoot gunneries. It was just target practice to, be a better tank crew. And one of our field exercises, we got out there and we had our tanks all lined up. And the Army chaplain, who was Catholic, came out to our tank formation and we had all of our ammo kind of laid out on tarps in front of the tanks, and he went down the line and sprinkled holy water on the tanks and the ammo and prayed for God's guidance for us to shoot straight and work as a team
for target practice.
Yeah. So essentially what he's doing is he's blessing our killing machines to make us more efficient murderers. Like
Jeez.
That's what we were training for.
Yeah. Oh,
and so that was eye-opening to me because I was like, I wouldn't have even done this at my most religious point in my life. I would not have sprinkled holy water on my rifle or prayed over my gun to hoping that it's going to shoot straighter,
Oh my God.
Asking God to help you kill better.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, he's got to be on one team or the other, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, aside from specific situations like that, I really didn't talk to people about religion. And I don't think at that point, atheist was even a word that I knew necessarily.
Isn't that crazy? Even when you don't see your life as being super sheltered, Like, I wouldn't say that my life was like overly sheltered. I did get out into the world and stuff, but there's so many things that I just didn't even realize because I was so surrounded and like involved in my culture and what I believed and what the people around me believed that I just didn't even, there were so many things I didn't know.
Yeah, mine was a little bit different because I went to public school my whole life. So there was always a wide variety of, different kind of people. And a lot of times I was probably the minority. Like a lot of my friends didn't go to church.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, the little town where I grew up, I went to public school my whole life as well. But the little town where I grew up, it was fairly homogenous. The town was kind of a feeder from the army base. And so, the church that we went to got quite a few of the military families who would come out there because they either weren't Catholic and didn't want to go to the army chapel on base, or they were just looking for, a specific Southern Baptist church to attend. And most of the people that I went to school with and that I went to church with were, white and like me and thought like me and talked like me. And so that's kind of what I encountered. Once I got into the army, that was not the case. And so it was, I think, encountering people from different backgrounds and different areas of the country and the world that really opened my eyes to how sheltered I had been and how insular my community had been.
Right. So what would you say was like the final straw, the thing that ultimately changed your mind? Could you nail it down to one thing, or was it just so gradual?
It was so gradual. I mean, it was kind of like the, frog in a pot of water.
Yeah.
Where, it wasn't as though I was dropped into a pot of boiling water. It was just this slow simmer up until the boiling point. And, it's really hard to say when the water was really hot versus when it was boiling. I mean, it's a really fuzzy line.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, it was just over time. I started reading more things, and I stopped going to church, and I started talking to people with different backgrounds. And I think the internet really changed things for me because I grew up before the internet, and it wasn't as though I had all of those resources at my fingertips like people do nowadays. And so once I did have access to the internet, I started talking to people who were atheist, who were Hindu, who were homosexual, who were, any number of backgrounds and life situations and life experiences that I had never encountered. And I started to think like, well, instead of judging these people right off, why don't I listen to them? And I think that just sort of opened my mind and got me started down the path of skepticism and atheism. And eventually I just was like, you know what? I'm just dumping this religious stuff. It doesn't even matter to me anymore. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And there was a point, I think it was, I want to say maybe 10, 11 years ago that I finally was like, yeah, you know what? I'm seeing all of this atheist content on the internet, and I that's how I identify. So I am an atheist. And from there, I think that I kind of did the typical atheism is new and shiny to me. I am going to be an evangelist for it, and really became, I would say, an activist, but sort of an ignorant activist. And did that for a while, and eventually kind of burned out a little bit on it because I didn't really know anything at that point. I was just kind of like, religion is dumb.
Yeah, I went through that phase for sure. Just like posting every day online things that I was learning, and like,
they need to know.
Oh my gosh, guys, did you know that the Bible says this? It's total bullshit. And like trying to walk that fine line of like expressing my anger and frustration, but also knowing that I had people in my life, like very dear people who still believed it. And I'm like, maybe I shouldn't call them moronic ideologies on Facebook.
Yeah.
Maybe I should hold back a little bit. Like I got called out, especially by my parents a lot for like saying stuff like that. They're like, okay, like, well, especially my dad. He's like, I agree with you. However, you're going to push everyone you love out of your life by saying this kind of stuff. It's like, but they need to know.
Well, yeah, because, when you were coming out of your faith, you needed those people to kind of just tip you over the edge and just to like give you that information that you needed, right, that thing that you needed to hear. And so once you get to that point, you're like, everybody needs to hear this. And
yes.
You just need to tell everybody. So, yeah.
Yeah, I never really had that, like seeing that kind of stuff from other people, because most of my friends at the time were pretty religious.
Right.
I was going to say, I agree with what you were saying about the mindset of taking a step back and actually listening to other people's ideas and mindsets. Like, it really kind of humanized people and like different lifestyles to make you realize that, like, oh yeah, maybe these people aren't horrible and evil people. And that was kind of one of the things that helped push me over the edge as well.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is, and speaking from my experience, I'm not trying to translate this to everybody's experience, but I was brought up essentially taught to prejudge people. If you can get a sense right offhand what their religious views are and they are somehow contrary to yours, then, they are, first of all, wrong, and second of all, in need of salvation. And so you are basically taught an us versus them mentality, that whole, if you're not with us, you're against us.
Yeah. And that translates into other areas. Like you had mentioned racism and stuff. Like I was raised that way as well, because we did have such a strong us versus them mentality that it just spilled over into other things as well. And it took coming out of religion to really do away with a lot of those ideas. And it was ultimately podcasts that helped me to discover those things and to see where I was wrong in my thinking. What was it for you that really helped you to deconstruct or deprogram or whatever you want to call it? Was it like more like so gradual that you had already kind of done that over the decade of doubting? Or was it something like, you became an atheist or you realized you're an atheist and you were like, holy shit, I need to look at things a little bit differently?
Yeah, well, like I said, I stumbled onto YouTube in kind of the early days of the YouTube atheist scene and started just soaking up content from those videos. And this was, before, I don't think it was completely before podcasts, but it was definitely before podcasts were really widespread. And okay, so I grew up when phones were hanging on the wall and
yeah,
with a dial.
Us too.
And, I didn't have a smartphone for a long, long time after smartphones were even a thing. And so, I was kind of a Luddite in that way. But eventually when, I discovered podcasts, I had already been an atheist and had considered myself an atheist and gone through my rabid activism phase for a while. But I would say that, the internet, I think, really changes the game for religion. And, before the internet, it was so easy to have just an isolated community where you only fellowship with other believers and you kind of reinforce that every Sunday and Wednesday and holidays and vacation Bible school, all of that keeps pounding that into your head and making it the normal way of thinking. But now with the internet, you have access to so much information at your fingertips with very little effort. It just kind of baffles me that people are still religious, especially like the younger generation who's always on YouTube and podcasts and
Yeah, seriously.
everything else.
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to think of them as being willfully ignorant. Like, you have all the information at your tips. You can look it up, but you actually have to take that first step of actually wanting to look it up.
Yeah.
Right.
It's really quite amazing just how much information we have available to us. Because I think back to when I was younger, and if I wanted to learn about something, I had to go to the library and I had to find books about it. And I was limited to what my local library had. And it's really, really quite an advantage that we have now in this day and age.
Right. And at the same time, I mean, think about it from the religious standpoint. You know, obviously, when the Bible was written, nobody had envisioned the internet.
Yeah.
Right.
But, you know, the tree of knowledge is just a fantastic illustration of the kind of situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, the religious people, especially with, you know, smaller cults and like FLDS and Scientology, like they don't want their people on the internet. There's too much information there.
Yep.
And it really takes the form of this tree of knowledge scheme. When you think about it that way, like that is going to lead you to hell. That's going to get you kicked out of paradise. You need to stay away from it. And I think that's the uphill battle that religion is fighting these days.
Yeah. What a ridiculous mentality to hold, you know, that knowledge is evil or somehow is going to corrupt your soul. Knowledge is the exact opposite of that. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is being able to make informed decisions about your life. Knowledge is science. And yeah, I'm so glad that coming out of that mindset has allowed me to live my life more fully. You know, do you feel like you live a more full, like, I don't know, valuable life now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ever since I reached the point where I said, you know what? Yes, atheist is the word that describes me. And I stopped worrying. I stopped feeling shackled by these beliefs and these doubts and the guilt that was instilled in me.
Oh, yeah.
And without, you know, being free of that, like now I know that, you know, there are certain ways that I should behave and there are certain ways that I should treat people because they're other humans, because they deserve the same respect that I would expect for myself. And it's not through any sense of fear of punishment or anticipation of reward. It's just living with other people in a civilized society and hoping to advance ourselves to where, you know, like 100 years ago, if you were getting your limb amputated, they just sawed it off. Like,
right.
we don't do that anymore. Like there are more humane ways of doing things because we have all of this information. We have science, we have the scientific method, and we have medicine, and this is a great time to be alive. And why would you live in this era with all of these wonderful things shackled to irrational beliefs?
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So yes, I feel like my life is so much better now.
Yeah,
Same.
I agree.
Yeah, the freedom is really something that I wasn't expecting, didn't know was out there until I stepped into it. I'm like, wow, this feels really good.
Yeah, it can be such a burden
huge
to
weight was lifted off of me.
Yeah. It can be such a burden to like have all that judgment and hate towards everybody that isn't like you.
Yeah, and I wasn't a hateful person. Like I've always been a very compassionate person, but because of the things that I believed, that was stifled so much. And when I was able to just completely open my heart, I'm like, oh my God, this feels really good. It feels good to just love without bounds.
Right. And that's a really great feeling. I mean, I can't say the same for me. If I would have met myself as a 17 or 18-year-old, I would not want to be my friend. Like that is not a person I would hang out with. And I feel like I almost feel like I'm a completely different person. I mean, you'll obviously change over time as you get older. You have different views and stuff like that. Like things naturally change. But for me, I don't recognize that person. I can't even imagine how present day me came from that person.
Yeah, isn't that incredible?
It is. It boggles my mind.
That's awesome.
So how did you go from becoming an atheist to where you are now with having a podcast and discussing religion on your podcast?
Well, when I had initially, adopted the atheist title, I got onto several, blog sites like Blogspot, and there was Zanga back then. It's not even a thing anymore.
Right. Yeah,
I remember that.
So back in the days of MySpace and
right.
GeoCities and Tripod. But yeah, back then there were platforms for you where, you didn't have to be a web developer to just write out content. And so I opened up a YouTube channel and just did little response videos, and they're kind of cringy to me now if I try to watch them.
You still have them up?
Yeah, they're still out there.
Good to know.
I would not direct anyone to them, but yeah. So, I had a little bit of an entrance into atheist media, atheist blogging, and I kept up with that for quite a while. And then I got willisweb.com, which is my main site. Also, waywardwillis.com goes to the same place. And so I've posted, tons and tons of articles, blog posts and things from back then, if you dig through the archives. But now mainly it's the podcast. And so the reason that I started a podcast was that I started listening to podcasts, and I really appreciated the views that were being expressed, the personalities that I was encountering on these podcasts, and the humor that could come out of topics of religion and social justice and skepticism. And because of that, I wanted to be a part of it. And so my idea for a podcast all along was, hey, my sons, both of them, were raised without religion. They've encountered religion, but I never taught them about it. I never took them to church. I never, certainly never pushed it on them. And they just kind of encountered it in the wild, like you would a lion on a safari, right? And so my idea was, I think it would be really interesting to tackle religious and cultural topics with my son who doesn't know anything about them.
Yeah.
And kind of, just poke fun where we want to poke fun and be serious where we want to be serious. And so, the way that the blurb on the podcast is set up, it's, we're talking about religion, we're talking about society from a secular humanist standpoint, and also trying to educate a little bit, because I do a lot of research as much as I can manage given time constraints. Every week. And I'm sure you know about that.
Yep.
And so, my goal is to educate both me and my son on each episode about a topic and just have some fun with it.
I think it's really a great idea.
Yeah, and you guys have a really good dynamic.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really fun to listen to you guys. I think it was a great plan to start that podcast. So yeah, we'll share some links to information about your podcast, your website, and all that in the description box for those listening.
Excellent.
Is there anywhere else you would like to point people?
Well, like I mentioned, our main site is either willisweb.com or waywardwillis.com. And there's content on there from, back when I was blogging. And there we link all of the podcast episodes there. So if you don't want to try and go out and find us on Facebook and Twitter and all of the various sites and podcatchers, then you can definitely go to our site and all of the episodes are posted there. In addition, I have been trying to keep up some semblance of a regular webcomic. And our podcast art, the idea I had for that, because my family is still very religious without me, is that I'm kind of the black sheep of the family. Yeah. And so sheep are sort of the mascots of the show. And so we have a webcomic with starring sheep. And I do episode art every week for each episode, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, that seems like it'd be fun. Yeah, I've seen several of those.
Yeah.
Scrolling through your stuff. And I enjoy it.
Yeah, I have a good time with it.
I like the what even is this?
Right.
Those episodes. The one we were on was what even is faith?
Yep.
I think that's a really fun approach to things. More lighthearted.
The description or the explanation for that my son likes to give is that we're all just a bunch of meme lords around here. And so we do the lolcat speak, and we've mentioned ceiling cat a time or two.
Nice.
That's great. Well, thank you, Jon. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and share your story and dig a little deeper. And we will definitely push people in the direction of your podcast.
Well, excellent. I'm really glad that I got to come on. I love talking to you, and it's nice to be on such a wonderful podcast with two wonderful people.
Oh, thanks.
Yay.
Yeah, it was great talking to you.
All right. Thanks, man. So that was our interview with Jon. We hope you guys enjoyed that. Now it's time to thank our amazing patrons. As usual, we are deeply grateful for our patrons and for your willingness to support what we're doing here. It does go a long way to have that money to help pay for certain costs associated with running a podcast and taking time out of our busy schedules to sit down and record. It just really is very, very helpful, and we don't take it for granted. So thank you guys very much. So at the level of $5 or above per episode, people get to plug something at the end of every show. And so we have a few people who are at that level. The first is Rich Kemp, who likes us to plug Recovering from Religion, which is recoveringfromreligion.org, where you can access resources to help you in your journey out of religion, or, if you're struggling with a certain thing that involves non-religion, such as grieving and not having faith to fall back on with that. There are agents who are available for phone calls or for chat online. You can even do it from your phone, so that's really awesome. The next one that we would like to plug is for Thomas Smith, who has the podcast Serious Inquiries Only. And Serious Inquiries Only is a podcast that takes a critical thinking, skeptical look at a variety of topics, mostly involving politics, religion, social justice, things like that. He invites on really great guests to talk about really fascinating subjects, and he does an awesome job of breaking it down and making it understandable. He does fantastic research as well. Next, we'd like to thank Marissa Alexa McCool, who would like us to plug her two main podcasts, which are Inciting Incident and The Sis Are Getting Out of Hand. Inciting Incident is a podcast where her and her co-host Bethany get on there and talk about all different kinds of topics pertaining to activism, the secular community, anything that is interesting, and they bring on guests to talk about it as well. And then The Sis Are Getting Out of Hand is a podcast by trans people, for trans people, about trans issues. And it's also fascinating for people who are actually cis, identify as the gender they were assigned at birth, to listen in and kind of learn from it. Next, we'd like to thank Jon Willis, who we interviewed tonight. And Jon has the podcast, The Wayward Willis, and we will have his information in the description box of where you can get a hold of him or find his content. Like he said, waywardwillis.com or willisweb.com. But I'll have more information about that. And lastly, Christopher Powell would like us to plug the Tri-State Freethinkers, which is a group in our area that focuses on activism, community service, social events, and education, which pretty much cover all areas of secular life. So it's kind of nice. No matter what kind of thing you're interested in, you can find it through the Tri-State Freethinkers. If you're in the Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio area, then get involved. Do it.
And lastly, we would like to thank our $5 and above patrons who don't have something to plug, and that would be Mark Ramsey and Justin Krebs. Thank you guys so much for your support. You guys are awesome.
Yep, and we appreciate all of our patrons, not just the $5 and above ones.
That's right.
So thank you guys so much for faithfully donating every week to us. We really appreciate it.
Don't forget to like our Facebook page or give us a review, give us a rating. That would greatly help us out.
Yep, gets us noticed on the interwebs.
As of last night, I checked, and we only have 4 reviews. We could get a few more.
Yeah, but those reviews were so nice.
They were awesome.
Patrick was reading them out loud. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Yay, people like us.
Yeah.
All right, well, that wraps us up for tonight. And we will catch you next time. But in the meantime,
keep it real.
And lastly, Christopher Powell would like us. Sorry.
Yummy.
All right. Well, that wraps us up for tonight. And we will catch you next time. But in the meantime.
But